In chapter 1, I mentioned that the main character of the book, Vaughn, felt like his father had all of the responsibility in providing for the family, keeping a roof over their heads, but little of the actual authority around the house. This was how it felt in our own home. And what I meant by that is that from a child's perspective, it seemed like my mother was the lead authority figure. She set all the rules for us children. She disciplined us and was the most vocal adult figure in the house. And even though my father was literally and figuratively the man of the house, the strongest, the biggest person between us all, I didn't look at him as the actual leader because my mother's presence really overshadowed his. And in fact, I sometimes, resented my father when I felt like he wouldn't assert some dominance and put my mother in check, especially when she was being very volatile. I wanted what I now call the calming and stabilizing influence of a man to maintain order and peace inside the home. And, I really want to be clear in reiterating that I didn't think my father was a weak man. He wasn't, some pussy, as sometimes men call each other in the manosphere, and he wasn't, a punk or whatever you want to call him. But here's 2 moments that changed my perception of my father's ability to flex, right? So the first was when I was around, it's like 11 or 12, and my parents got into another horrible argument, similar to others I mentioned in the book. But this one was very, very different. So same pattern in the past, but this time, both of my parents are in their bedroom and they're having a chippy conversation. It was an argument and they're bickering at one another. And then the voices escalate to where they're now shouting at each other and they're hurling threats. In the past, I saw my father's anger escalate at about to like an 8 on a scale from 1 to 10. This time, he was at a legitimate 12. Freaked me out. My brother was about 16 or 17 at this time, and my brother-in-law, who was probably, I'm going to say in his late 20s or early 30s, is actually at the house with my sister and his daughter from his break from medical school. Both went to my parents' bedroom to check out what was going on. My brother and my brother-in-law, right? So I'm still in my room and I'm listening to what's going on until I hear this ruckus that sounded like bodies banging against the furniture and bodies banging against the walls. And how do I place that noise? Well, I've seen them in action before and knew what that ruckus was consistent with. And then I heard my father repeat a phrase that damn near made my eyes jump out of my skull. And that phrase was, "I'm going to kill her. I'm going to kill her." And he kept screaming that at the top of his lungs. It was this, I've had enough of this shit kind of a rage. Now, I say this once again, not knowing what the big argument was between my parents was all about, but it really, really piqued my curiosity along with frightening me. So I went downstairs and cautiously went to see what was happening in my parents' bedroom. And just as I got to this short hallway that connected, that we called the family room, it connected the family room here to like my parents' bedroom. And my mother was leaving very purposely, like she knew it was in her best interest to get out of that bedroom. So she gets out of there and quickly walked past me and goes to the front of the house. I slowly enter, my parents' bedroom, and I see my brother-in-law and my brother both pinning my father down, holding him down by his arms and his legs on the bed so he couldn't get up to get my mother. So you're talking about my father, who at the time was about 6'1" and a good 220 pounds, with my brother, who was a wiry 6'6", about 215, and my brother-in-law, who back then was probably about 5'9", maybe 165, 170 pounds. And I looked at my father, who was again pinned down on his back and in rage. And now he's crying and he's saying, I'm tired of her shit. I'm a killer. I'm tired of her. And this continued, man, for a good 15 to 20 minutes before my father started to calm down, before my brother-in-law and my brother got off of him. But they didn't just go back to their rooms. They sort of stood around between my father and the bedroom door in case my father decided to just go charge after my mother, which, I was glad that it didn't happen. And what I felt at that time was this, like after all of their physical confrontations I had seen between my parents, Daddy was holding back. And let me tell you, for all of the times that I wish my father had imposed his will before, I was glad that he wasn't able to in that manner, because as tough as my mother was, she wasn't a match for my father. If he would have completely gone after her in that way, in a physical way, and let me just say, I generally don't think any man should lose restraint and go after a woman in that way. That's not cool. And I'm so glad I didn't have to witness that. And I'm grateful that my parents' disputes never rose to that level. They got fucked up sometimes. So that's one story. So here's one more quick story that actually happened within maybe a couple of months after the first incident, where my parents were wilding out. So I'm probably, I don't know, man, like 11 or 12 still. And I'm sitting on the porch, in the front porch of our house after I got home from school. And it's around maybe 3:30-ish or whatever. And so my father stopped home after his first job to grab something to eat, like he would do sometimes. So now, for those of you that haven't read the book yet, I tell the story of what happened when three Bloods cruising down our street saw this clueless Crip walking around our neighborhood, and this dude is wearing blue. He's wearing enemy colors, and it just got real bad. So this was only a few of the stories I actually shared in the book, and here's another. Okay, so it's after school, and there's these two guys walking side by side down the street. And as they come into focus, they're coming towards our house. It was clear that the bigger guy, a medium-sized person in his late teens, was bullying a smaller guy who was, a few inches shorter and very, very slender. So the bigger guy had his fist cocked, and he's just ready to punch the smaller guy. And he kept badgering him and trying to punk him out, and he's yelling, saying, say something else. I'm going to start swinging. Like he's ready to take off on the dude. The smaller guy clearly didn't want anything to do with that. In fact, he's trying to walk away from the bigger guy, who keeps cutting him off and getting in his face and intimidating the guy. So by this time, my father pulls into the driveway with his truck, and he sees the action, and maybe he realizes that I don't know either of these dudes, right? But even then, the bigger guy is still pressing the smaller guy while on our lawn, which I don't know what the fuck that was all about. And he's like, say something else, and I'm gonna start swinging. The guy continued. And I honestly thought my father was gonna try and de-escalate the situation as a peacemaker until he said, you motherfuckers gonna get off my goddamn grass, I'm gonna start swinging. And that surprised the shit out of me. So the bully, the bigger guy, without looking at my father, says, well, I ain't worried about that. And my father's holding his lunch pail. My father dropped his lunch pail on the ground and started walking towards these two guys. And now my daddy got his fist balled up. And he has this scowl on his face that I've only seen when he got into it with my mother. And he leans into the bully's ear and he yells, well, motherfucker, you better start worrying about it, because right now I'm pissed the fuck off. Never heard my daddy talk like that to people. Never. The bully sort of glances down at my father's fist, and my daddy had these big, thick kielbasa sausage fingers, and saw that my daddy was serious. And he wasn't wavering, even though he had a good 15 years on this dude. So then the bully's whole persona started dampening a bit then. And, he kind of started walking away. He's still mad dogging the smaller guy, like, I'm going to get you, I'm going to catch you later. And so my father asked the smaller guy, like, hey, you need a ride home? And dude said yes. And my father clearly thought maybe the bigger, the bully, the bigger guy would be waiting for him around the corner or something. So they jumped in my father's truck. My daddy took the guy home. Daddy came back home, made his shit. So like looking back, those two moments put things more into focus. And I can now say that sometimes we don't know what kind of rage people have on reserve inside of them. You never know. And what I didn't realize is that even though my parents physically fought, it sometimes takes a lot of discipline for people to walk away from confrontation. And my father did his fair, he did his fair share of that, along with, of course, making some huge mistakes alongside my mother in that area. And I think a lot of men know this, which is why we often walk away from volatile people whom we know we can outclass in hand-to-hand combat. And we should be grateful for it, right?